Hi, welcome to another new video. So today I'll be talking about all about papers for ink and wash. So have you ever bought a new sketchbook, painted several pages, and then to your surprise realized that the paper is actually rubbish? And you actually wasted like some pages. And of course, you also doubted your ability as a watercolorist or an artist. So in this video, I will share with you how you can first test out the watercolor papers when you purchase it, so that you can adjust your technique or your supplies to suit the paper. So there's no bad paper, it's just what it is actually made for. When you buy paper, first thing first, there's actually information that you can try to figure out before buying them. So for example, this is like a block book, right, with a watercolor paper in there. So there's certain things on this, that on the packaging that you can find. For example, the grammage of the paper, 300 GSM, it's hot press, so the texture is hot press, it's 100% cotton, and you can actually see from the side like whether it's creamy or it's white. So this is, I guess, like the minimum, because all this would be like cover up. And then when you bring it back home, you can try out these functional tests that I would suggest. So every artist should do their own functional tests, because there are different requirements and different expectations. Normally I do ink and wash, so my requirement is actually to find a sweet spot for these two different media. And for the functional test, I would suggest that you use your usual supply, use your usual paint, usual pen, so that it's applicable for you. So this is how I set up the testing paper. So flip to your sketchbook and go to the last page, and just take one sheet of paper. So for watercolor paper, you just take, this is about less than A4 size, about between A4 to A5 size. That should be good enough. And what you need to do on there is to actually draw out this grid. And we will be testing the pen and the ink over here, right? And we will be testing all the watercolor features over here. And this is where you keep like a repertoire of the colors that you normally use, and also special colors that you really like. For this section, we are looking at how pen reacts on the paper. We're testing a few variables. First would be the speed of writing. So I have a fast speed and slow speed. Second variable is the length, the pen nib thickness. So I have a thin and a thick. And the next variable is actually whether I have the paint on top of it or the paint below it. Like, I don't know, which one goes first, ink and wash or wash and ink. So the first thing that I'll do is actually to use the ultramarine blue. I'll do a very light wash over this section. So we will let this dry. Right, so we start with the extra fine, scratching it just to see if there's any skips, because sometimes the paper surface do give a lot of texture, and that can cause a lot of problems when you draw. So normally this is how I test it. So we start with the thin fast. I actually just do things like this, and then I'll note to myself if it's difficult or easy to draw anything. You do see there's a little bit of skip over here. And then for the next box, I will try with slowly. Okay, so this is actually just to check if it would cause any feathering, or will it cause any bleeding to the other side. And then I will move on to the dried layer, where I put the ink over the watercolor. And I find that after putting that watercolor layer on, it's actually much easier to draw. Some papers, especially those that are not so good, you start to see the ink feathering here. Okay, so far so good. This paper, I do not see any feathering with the thin pen, right? And then now we're going to try to use the Fude pen, the pen with the Fude nib. There's actually some ponding of that ink, but I don't see any feathering, which is very good. There is very slight feathering at the end, but it remains quite distinct. The next thing I'll do is actually a glazing test. I would just make a strip across like that. So when this is sufficiently dry, you could already add the second layer of color for the glazing. And for this, I'll choose a magenta color. So I'll just put it down and see if what I'm looking at in the glazing study is actually to see whether the painting of a second layer would actually remove any of the colors from the first layer. Let's try to use a yellow color this time and see if there is any color that comes off, and no, right? You can actually see that the two layers, the layers of colors did not get lift off, which is good. That means this paper is good for glazing. I also would put in the color for lifting, and that would be the cerulean blue for the non-staining, right? And for the staining color, we'll be using phthalo blue. Okay. So for the lifting test, it's quite invasive. You need to destroy the paper surface. So I would suggest actually not using a good brush. Just use this is a water brush, and I'll use a tissue paper to just dab off that. So I think it's all right. Like, I can lift off colors. The surface did come off a bit, but it's not a big problem. Yeah, and let's try the staining color. Can you actually see, like, there's actually balls of paper that you can actually pull off the surface when we do the lifting, right? So it's actually okay, I think, for a small area, but it does not, because it's a staining color, so you can't remove the whole thing. And I think it's all right. This paper is actually okay for a small amount of lifting, because I think after taking off the first layer, the paper still looks pretty okay. Like, it looks pretty normal. Let's try to do the edges with the ultramarine blue. So I have two squares here. This one has been drying, and we'll try with the wet. So this is the ultramarine blue. Let's try to just add a bit of water just to see whether any of these colors, if it's easy, just make a soft edge from, and as evidently shown here, yeah, you can do edges definitely with this paper. Very beautiful edges. And let's try when the plane has dried. It's possible, but it does not give you a large degree. And next test is the fun test, where we just dump water, and this one is the wet on wet test. Here we just put water, like a lot of it, onto this square. This square has two functions, right? First, it lets you test out how much water your paper can take, and secondly, it allows you to see how the grains of the paper is. So you can actually, some paper do have certain kind of like a directional grain, and when you have a large area like this and a granulating paint, you'll be able to see what color, how that grain looks like. I'm just gonna do this and let it dry, but I can already see that this part has certain parts take up water, absorb water more than other parts. While waiting for this to dry, is to try out the colors that you have normally that you have in your palette. So this is just for you to just see, how the colors will be affected, because different paper do react differently to different colors. And if there are special colors that you like to test, you should use them here. I am someone who loves fountain pen inks, and I sometimes use them in my painting. I also try to actually play around with the colors, just to check how the inks would actually perform in watercolor paper. So yeah, what I do here is I actually use special inks like the polychrome inks. So polychrome inks are actually the inks that do have like have a mixture. It looks like there's actually a mixture of few colors in the ink. So what I do is I'll just put them onto the paper and see if you can actually see the properties that are very desirable when you actually buy them as fountain pen inks. So that is a polychrome. This is a Vinta Aging ink, and here we have the Vinta Goldus, which is a shimmer ink. So as you can see, this ink has got shimmer. And the last one is actually Cosmic Blue. It's a sheening ink. So sheening ink, they look different. They have different color at different angles. Okay, so I'm just gonna let it dry. You know, dyes, they can be deactivated, or colors can be removed by bleach. So I just want to see if it's possible to actually remove these colors with bleach. And I do it this way by actually putting a solution or bleach just to see if there's any effect. This is the point where we wait for the paper to dry, because this pond is going to take a long time. So I'll see you in a while. So the way to look at the wet on wet result is actually when it has dried. So if you notice here, the ponding of the pigment on the exterior, like if the square nearer to the cut edges, just showing out like this lighter area is like the water, you know, it absorbs into the paper, it bloats out and it pushes out the pigment. So it shows there's a little bit of warping in there, but it does not affect a lot of the whole integrity of the paper. So I think it's acceptable, because can you see, like, even though there is a little bit of that bloated, you know, the warp slightly, it does not affect how the paper actually feels. Okay, and you can also see how beautiful the granulation is just with ultramarine blue and the actual texture of the paper. Color wise, you can also see all these beautiful granulation. And regarding the ink, you might see slight differences. There's probably two inks here, two different pigment dye inside. The bleach worked, you know, giving you a very interesting pattern, the coloration there. Same as for the shimmer ink, you do see that shimmer, right? The particles. Sheen wise, you don't really see very much. This is how you interpret the test, and from this test you would actually know that this paper is really quite a good paper, because it allows you to do a lot of these maneuvers, like the lifting pretty okay. The glazing, yeah, you could actually see this part being dark and none of these colors coming off. You could also see the beautiful granulation, especially in some of these colors. The separation looks really, really nice, and it actually works okay with the pen and ink. So of course these would all apply to sketchbooks, because they all use paper. But additionally, for sketchbook, you need to consider like maybe how these books are compiled, like the binding, what sort of binding they have, the size, and how it opens, the weight, and perhaps like the cover, you know, what kind of cover they have. And once you understand the paper, you know what you can, what you cannot do with it. And if you realize that they can't take a lot of heavy washes, you can dedicate it for just, you know, ink sketching, or you can use the crayons on it, something like that. So I hope that this video is useful for you. Do let me know if I have missed out any other tests, or if there's anything else that you look out for when you test out watercolor papers. I will be coming out with another video on how to test out papers for fountain pen inks. So if you're looking for a good paper to use your fountain pens on, for let's say for your note taking, for bullet journals, stay tuned for the next, I think, upcoming videos that I will put out for that content. All right, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy the content, give me a thumbs up, and remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Bye bye.